The most expensive military in human history just spent $24 billion in 7 weeks defending against drones that cost about 20 grand a pop. And they're losing. Here's how Iran did it and how it changes everything. For decades, we've operated under the assumption that technological superiority is all that matters in modern warfare. Iran has smashed the paradigm. They've proven that ingenuity and strategic doctrine can defeat technologies that seemed untouchable, that cost asymmetry and deliberate planning can exhaust a superpower. For the United States, it's now spending billions defending against millions in attacks, pulling munitions from the Pacific to sustain Middle East operations and materially weakening its deterrent against China and Russia. The entire post-Cold War defense doctrine collapses under the weight of this reality. For Israel, the Iron Dome, the system it built its entire security posture around, has been proven penetrable, and that changes everything about how it calculates deterrence and defense going forward. For both, they've learned the hard way that you can't win wars by just out-teching your opponents. Iran has provided a proof of concept for mid-tiered military states across the planet. China and Russia are also watching. They sit back as the American empire depletes its defenses. A new template is now public. So how did Iran pull this off? It's certainly not luck or improvisation. What you're watching is the result of 2 decades of deliberate strategic study. Former MI6 officer Alastair Crooke points out that Iran has learned from every major conflict in the last 25 years. From Iraq in 2003, they learned, don't build an air force. The US destroyed Saddam's air force in the opening days of the war. So they built missiles instead. They're cheap and they're harder to hit. From Hezbollah in 2006, they learned that decentralized command survives decapitation strikes. From Russia and Ukraine and the Houthis in the Red Sea, they learned that mass cheap drones and asymmetric naval tactics can overwhelm expensive defenses. Iran's fight is not in desperation. It's within an understanding of the existential threat it is under, and its strategic, clear-eyed realism about what they can and cannot do. They know their constraints, and they know their enemy's weaknesses. They've designed every weapon system, every tactic, and every deployment around that understanding. What you're about to see is a breakdown of Iran's strategy of depletion, how it's systematically exhausting its enemy's defenses while maintaining its staying power in a conflict with the world's leading superpower. We're going to look at the weapons, the tactics, and once you've walked through this evidence, you'll see Iran is not improvising. Iran's primary weapon is the Shahed 136, a long-range one-way attack drone, delta-wing, propeller-driven, 30 to 50 kilogram warhead with a range of about 1,500 to 2,500 kilometers. Cost per unit, $20,000 to $50,000. Iran launches these in mass salvos, dozens at a time, at U.S. bases and Israeli targets all over the region. Patriot interceptors deployed by the U.S. to defend its bases and to supplement Israeli defenses cost $4 million each. THAAD interceptors cost $15.5 million. To defend against one salvo of drones, defenders may expend 30 to 60 interceptors, and Iran can execute this dozens and dozens of times over. As per Theodore Postol, professor at MIT and one of the most respected defense analysts alive, the official interception rates being claimed by Israel and the United States don't match what the open source evidence shows. Postol argues that publicly cited rates of 90% or higher are dramatically overstated, mirroring the same pattern that he observed while he was analyzing the 1991 Gulf War. The Patriot system in particular is failing far more often than the officials are admitting. But the cost is only half the story. The production asymmetry is even more devastating. Iran produces the Shahed in standard industrial facilities using off-the-shelf, commercially available components. Engines, electronics, navigation systems, civilian-grade parts that don't require specialized military supply chains. The production base is distributed, resilient, and cannot be bombed out because there's no single factory to target. And Russia is now building them too. At the Kupul plant in Izavesh, the supply is expanding, not sinking. Now compare that to what the US faces to replace what it's expended. According to the April 2026 CSIS report, recently released, replenishing depleted Patriot interceptors will take up to 42 months. THAAD interception up to 53 months. Why so long? Because these systems require specialized solid rocket motor productions, advanced semiconductors and seekers, rare earth elements, specialized alloys, and specialized assembly facilities. The U.S. defense industrial base has been hollowed out over the decades. There are limited suppliers for many critical components. Even if Washington wanted to surge production, it physically cannot. The supply chain just doesn't exist anymore. Palmer Luckey is saying that he's going to repurpose automobile facilities as a way to ramp up production. Let's see how that goes. This is the core of the cost asymmetry. Iran loses a $20,000 drone and it builds a new one tomorrow. The US loses a $4 million Patriot interceptor and it may not be able to replace it for 2 or 3 years. This is not a war that you can win by attrition. It's a war that you lose by attrition. Decoys have become a central part of Iran's reported depletion strategy. They range from the absurdly simple to the surprisingly sophisticated. While documentation and the effectiveness is limited, evidence suggests that Iran has procured them in significant quantities. At the simplest end, painted runway decoys. Life-size, three-dimensional, anamorphic paintings of aircraft supplied directly to runways and airfields. Costs virtually nothing. The intent is clear. U.S. and Israeli reconnaissance assets would waste expensive precision munitions striking targets that don't exist. But the more strategically significant decoys are the inflatable mock-ups Iran has imported from China. And they aren't just balloons. They're designed as sophisticated, multispectral signature generators meant to fool radar, infrared, and visual reconnaissance simultaneously. Chinese military analysts studying NATO's Kosovo campaign concluded that using one decoy per target boosts survivability by roughly 40%. Each decoy is reportedly built with several integrated systems. Thermal emitters to mimic engine heat, metal film coating to generate radar returns, and signal generators to broadcast vehicle radar cross-sections. They deploy via compressed gas canisters that inflate in 10 minutes and are built to withstand extreme conditions. Iran procured these in massive quantities. Reports cite hundreds of thousands of units. Meanwhile, Iran's actual missile systems sit up to 800 meters under granite mountains, invisible to satellite reconnaissance and untouchable by airstrike. Then there's the third layer, mid-flight decoy swarms. Decoys deployed mid-air from incoming missiles to confuse interceptors during re-entry. The theory is sound. Defenders are forced to allocate $4 million interceptors against radar tracks they cannot reliably distinguish from genuine warheads. The strategic logic across all three layers is identical. Iran isn't trying to guarantee penetration with every launch. They're creating a probabilistic environment where defenders must waste expensive interceptors on decoys, deplete their stockpiles below critical thresholds, and eventually allow real warheads to pass through. Painted runways waste cruise missiles. Inflatable decoys waste precision strikes. Mid-flight decoys waste interceptors. The unifying principle. Every dollar the adversary spends is a dollar that won't be there when the actual missiles arrive. This is where Iran's strategic thinking becomes most clearly visible. Iran's ballistic missiles weren't designed to be the most advanced in absolute terms. They were specifically engineered as countermeasures against Israeli and American defense systems. Iran studied these defenses, identified their vulnerabilities, and built missiles tailored to defeat them. Two capabilities stand out. The first is maneuverable warheads, most associated with Iran's Fatah series. Traditional ballistic missiles follow a predictable arc. Once launched, you can calculate where they're going. And that's exactly how systems like Patriot, THAAD, David Sling, and Arrow do their job. They predict a missile's trajectory and launch an interceptor to meet at a calculated point in space. The Fatah breaks this math. It's a warhead that can adjust trajectory mid-flight, including during terminal reentry. The interceptor is fired toward a predicted intercept point, but the missile is no longer going to that point, so the defense algorithm fails. A single Fatah missile costs roughly $500,000, but it takes up to 5 or 6 Patriot interceptors at $4 million each to attempt to shoot it down. So Iran spends $500,000, the defender spends $20 million, and the defender often misses anyways. The second capability is cluster warheads, most associated with the Karamshar-4 K-bar missile. With a 2,000 kilometer range and a 1,500 kilogram payload, a single warhead splits open at high altitudes and around 7 kilometers up disperses dozens of smaller submunitions, each weighing 2.5 to 5 kilograms. So this isn't about precision. It's about multiplying the defensive burden. One missile becomes 30, 40, 80 radar tracks. The defender cannot reliably distinguish between real submunitions and decoys, and they cannot afford to ignore any of them. At $4 million per Patriot interceptor, defending against a single K-bar dispersal can cost $320 million in defensive fire to stop one $500,000 missile. Both of these capabilities, maneuverable warheads and cluster munitions, were engineered specifically to defeat the predictive algorithms and finite interceptor stockpiles of Israeli and American defenses. They're not just weapons. They're countermeasures purpose-built for this fight, and the cost asymmetry is staggering. Iran is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars per missile. The defender is spending tens of hundreds of millions of dollars per engagement. Even when the defender succeeds, they lose financially. Even when they fail, they lose financially. There is no scenario in which the math works in favor of the defender over time. Theodore Postol has documented something even more damning. Israel is firing Iron Dome interceptors, Tamirs, designed for short-range unguided rockets at incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. There's an image he circulated, captured from real combat footage, showing 9 or 10 or maybe more Tamir interceptors arcing into the sky, running out of energy and curving back downward without ever reaching their target. Take a look at the photo. The bright flashes are the interceptors self-destructing in midair as a failsafe to limit ground damage when no target is hit. Postol calls this an extraordinary mismanagement of Iron Dome interceptors against ballistic missile debris and targets. The Iron Dome was never designed to intercept ballistic missiles. That's what Arrow is for. But Israel is so depleted of the right interceptors that they're throwing the wrong ones at the problem and hoping for the best. It should tell you everything you need to know about the state of Israel air defense. But here's where it gets worse. Iran's missile accuracy is currently poor, roughly 1,000 meters CEP compared to 5 to 10 meters CEP for a US Tomahawk. That sounds like a massive disadvantage. It isn't, because Iran is one retrofit away from changing it. Russia is offering the Kometa M jam-resistant navigation system. China is offering the Baidao system, which delivers higher precision than civilian GPS. Both are software and electronic upgrades that can bolt on to existing Iranian missiles. No factories, no new designs, just an upgrade to the arsenal that already exists. Per the April 2026 DIA assessment, Iran could achieve 200 to 300 meters CEP within months. That's the depletion strategy at the missile layer. Missiles designed for cost asymmetry, engineered as a countermeasure, and on the verge of becoming significantly more lethal. All on Iran's timeline. If you want to see Iran's depletion strategy in its purest, most distilled form, look at the Strait of Hormuz. Iran deployed an estimated 20 naval mines in the strait. Cost per mine, approximately $1,500 each. Total Iranian capital expenditure, roughly 30 grand. That's about the cost of my Chevy Silverado. And it has shut down 20% of the world's oil and gas trade. The Pentagon's own internal assessment, briefed to the House Armed Services Committee in April of 2026 and reported by the Washington Post, estimates it will take about 6 months to clear the strait after the hostilities end. 6 months. And again, the clearance cannot begin while the war is still active. This means that Iran has effectively given itself control as to when the war ends. To clear those mines, the US and its allies deployed 3 Independence-class littoral combat ships at $500 million each. Iran retains a pre-war stockpile of mines numbered in the thousands, and it can lay more at any time, potentially extending the timeline indefinitely. The danger zone alone covers 1,400 square kilometers, 14 times the size of Paris. Even unverified mine threats are enough to keep commercial traffic out because no shipping company will risk a $300 million tanker against the possibility of a $1,500 mine. For a historical context, after the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War, multinational coalition forces required more than 2 years to clear hundreds of mines from the northern Gulf and declare it mine-free. That was hundreds of mines. Iran has thousands in reserves. If this war drags on, the timeline doesn't shrink, it grows. The math is almost too lopsided to believe. Iran spends $30,000 to close 20% of global oil and gas trade for at least 6 months. The US and its allies will spend billions of dollars deploying specialized military assets and assemble a 30-nation coalition for years of clearance work. And that's the best case scenario. And here's the kicker. Because mines cannot be cleared out while hostilities continue, and because the global economic cost of a closed strait is enormous, Iran has effectively given itself leverage over war termination. The US cannot end the strait crisis without ending the war. Sustained gas prices over $4 a gallon, particularly heading to the US midterm elections, create domestic political pressures that favor Iran. The Pentagon's 6-month assessment was politically embarrassing enough that the Defense Department publicly denied it. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell called the leaked assessment cherry-picking and said that a 6-month closure is an impossibility and completely unacceptable to the Secretary. But the assessment exists. It was briefed to Congress. The reality of the situation is documented. This is depletion in its purest form. $30,000 in mines imposing multi-billion-dollar, multi-year costs to the most powerful military in human history, and its 30-nation coalition. There is no clearer demonstration of the cost imposition logic, and no clearer signal to other mid-tier states about what is possible. When you combine the depletion of the adversary with longevity for yourself, you reach a point where the math flips. The defenders' stockpiles run low, the interceptors get stretched thin, and the economic cost of staying in fight becomes politically untenable. And then, Iran's missiles, designed as countermeasures and about to get a precision retrofit from Russia and China, start breaking through defenses that can no longer afford to stop them. To be clear, none of this suggests that the US and Israel lack the capacity to inflict massive destruction on Iran. They do. They have nuclear weapons, they have overwhelming conventional firepower, and they've already conducted 1,300 strikes on Iranian territory. The damage is real, the damage is severe. But destruction is not the same as victory. Wars are won by achieving political objectives at an acceptable cost. And what Iran's depletion strategy has done is raise the cost of every available military option, short of options no US administration has been willing to deploy, and to a level that's politically and economically unsustainable. The bombs keep falling, the missiles keep flying, and Iran keeps on fighting. That is the strategic reality that this war has exposed, and the receipts are public. In April 2026, the Center for Strategic and International Studies released its munitions assessment. Over the 7-week war, the United States expended 45 to 61% of its Patriot missile stockpiles, 52 to 80% of its THAAD interceptors, 20 to 40% of its Tomahawks, precision strike missiles, JASSMs, and standard missiles. Total cost, $24 billion. The number's likely low. Replenishment timeline, 1 to 4 years, with some interceptors taking up to 53 months. To sustain Middle East operations, the U.S. is now drawing down stockpiles from Indo-PACOM, the Pacific theater built specifically to deter China. Chinese state media is now reporting on this openly. That same month, the Pentagon's own Defense Intelligence Agency Director, Marine Lieutenant General James Adams, testified before Congress that Iran retains thousands of missiles and one-way attack drones. Roughly half of its pre-war ballistic missile arsenal is intact, 2/3 of its air force, 60% of its naval arm, and, in his exact words, Iran will further asymmetric warfare advancements to augment its conventional capabilities as it remains in conflict with the United States. People like Alastair Crooke go one step further, saying that Iran is in fact salami slicing, that is, saving the best for last. So that's the US intelligence community confirming on the record what this entire video is all about. This is a proof of concept moment. The template is now public, and so are the receipts. And nothing about modern warfare looks the same after this.